last, after many tries, the kites would take off, soaring over the barbed wire, over the soldiers, over the checkpoints, and over the beautiful families in Al Khalil in their historic homes. So my friends, may we learn from the steadfastness of children. May we never lose hope. May we each day keep sight of liberation. May we be courageous. May we risk. May we act to dismantle the occupation. We each have our part to play. We each have very different roles to play, but we each have one. Arundhati Roy says, another world is not only possible, she is on her way. On a quiet day, I can hear her breathing. May it be so. May we see in our lifetime a free Palestine. Thank you.
What are you doing here? We know you always enter from the other side. Why are you here? As an Israeli soldier asked my Palestinian friend when we were entering that part of Hebron that's controlled by the Israeli military. He didn't have to show his green identity card because the cameras already recognized his face and showed to the soldiers his family history, his history of movement, and his security rating. And these facial recognition cameras have been banned in a number of American states. The EU calls for its prohibition, and Israel's Supreme Court already prohibited them from appearing in Israeli public life. So it's clear that the EU, the USA, and Israel do value the right to autonomy and privacy of its own citizens, but not that of the Palestinians. You cannot go back to the Arab part. You are a Jew. The soldier said to my American Jewish friend who came to visit me in Hebron when I was living in Hebron. Although he had arrived with a Palestinian bus to the Palestinian part of Hebron, what the Israeli soldiers would call the Arab part of Hebron, he was not allowed to go back to that part once we entered that part that's controlled by the Israeli military, as if a Jew would immediately be eaten alive if he entered the Palestinian part of Hebron. And so he had to take the settler bus back to Jerusalem, and I had to walk home alone. Do you have Muslims amongst you? They cannot go further. The Israeli soldiers said to our group when we were having a tour in the old city of Hebron. So the Palestinians and Muslims amongst us had to return, and the rest of us could go on. The Netherlands, beautiful country, have a great day, the soldiers would always say to me when I showed my passport. And in Hebron, it becomes daily routine to show your passport and to tell your religion. And it became very clear to me that it's not because I'm a human that I have human rights, but it's because I have a Dutch passport and I'm not a Jew and I'm not a Muslim. And for Palestinians, having a passport means the opposite of being granted human rights. Sorry. Because by the sole fact of being a Palestinian and having a Palestinian passport, they're only allowed to move within restricted areas. Their every move is seen by cameras everywhere they go. They're being humiliated or worse at checkpoints if they want to go to their home, to their family, or to another city. And they have to admit their identity everywhere they go. It's impossible for me to lay down all the human rights violations that Palestinians are subject to, but here I will give you a view of what I have seen during my time in Hebron. I have spent 3 months in Hebron because, I mean, this has been said in the introduction, so I will keep it short, but yes, I wanted to see with my own eyes because I want to be a journalist, and you know, there's a lot of contradicting news out there about Palestine, so I wanted to see it for myself. 2 months I volunteered at a center, and the last month I moved to H2, to the area that's under the control of the Israeli military. And there I heard and saw a lot of stories, among other things, about settler violence. Yes, and then I published in Mondowise, and that's how Tree of Life Educational Fund found me. And thank you for being here, and thank you for inviting me. I'm very happy to be here. So about Hebron, there will be some photos here where you can see how beautiful Hebron is for those who haven't visited. And I wanted also to emphasize that, although in this presentation I will tell mostly things that were not that pleasant. So I would say about this time, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times, and I'm sure you know who I'm quoting. And even though, the old city is very beautiful, but even the most ignorant tourists cannot ignore that the occupation settled in the heart of this old city, because you only have to look up and you'll see that there are nets spread above the streets that are protecting the customers of the shops and the shop owners and all those who are moving between places. What are they protecting them from? Well, from everything that the settlers throw down. You can see it on the photos if they appear. So it ranges from broken bottles, broken chairs, sticks, stones, and shop owners also complained that settlers were throwing down their dirty water, which of course the nets cannot protect them against. And it seems then that the settlers don't let any chance go by of harassing their Palestinian neighbors. And this is, I've heard many of these stories. I will start with Badr Tamimi, which is a shop owner in the old center of Hebron. He has a souvenir shop, and he showed me many videos of settlers throwing stones at his shop. And we may be able to see after some photo. This is Badr. His shop is right across the entrance of the Beit Hadassah settlement, which Dalia mentioned. And so because it's right across the entrance, there's also a checkpoint where Israeli soldiers look out over, among other things, Badr's shop. So they see it when Badr's shop is attacked, but either soldiers would do nothing, or they would start shooting tear gas and sound bombs at Badr's shop to force him to close his shop. And he showed me the canisters that were shot at his shop. And it was a screenshot from one of those videos where settlers are throwing stones. And the next one, it's a bit random, but this is a settler with a machine gun. And so, as you may know, settlers are allowed to carry weapons, but Palestinians absolutely not. And unfortunately, after I left Hebron, a few weeks after, I heard that Badr's souvenir shop was set on fire. We have a very dark photo of it. And because in this part of Hebron, Palestinian police is not allowed, there hasn't been an official investigation, but I mean, for most people, it's quite clear who has done it. And so from many shop owners, I heard that it's impossible for them to do their business there. It's already hard because tourists are scared away by the Israeli authorities, of course, but now they're also attacked by settlers all the time and forced to close their shops. And this is convenient for the settlers to make it even harder and harder for them to do their business there, because they make no secret of their aim to advance further and further into the city. In one of the last weeks I spent in Hebron, settlers took over a Palestinian-owned house at the end of Shohada Street. Yes, this house. And on the first day of the existence of this new settler hub, there were hundreds and hundreds of settlers coming from probably all over the West Bank, maybe even all over Israel, through Shohada Street to this house. And Shohada Street, as you've been told before, is closed for Palestinians, but settlers can walk there. And they are constantly guarded by 30 or 40 soldiers. And these soldiers are standing on the roof of the building, on the balconies of the building, and in front of the house. And it looks like a strange mafia movie. And these settlers, they hang around the army vehicles, and they casually converse with the soldiers, and the soldiers would eat the ice cream that the settlers would hand them. Even though at the same time, 30 meters down, I don't know how many yards that is, soldiers would be harassing and intimidating Palestinians at a checkpoint. And as you've also heard before, it's actually the duty of the Israeli military to protect Palestinians because they are on occupied land and these are occupied people. But instead, settlers are protected in every move they make, even in their criminal behavior. And because this new settler hub arrived, the Palestinian neighbors were desperate because they know what consequences that's going to have, and they already are enclosed in by checkpoints on every side, every direction they want to go. There are cameras on all the walls that even penetrate into their living rooms, and there's of course already a high presence of soldiers, which now will only increase. And they know what kind of behavior the settlers will do, because all the Palestinian families that live next to settlements and next to settlers occupied houses, they tell the same stories, that usually on Saturdays and also on Israeli holidays, settlers would start throwing stuff at their houses and swear at them. Mahmoud, for example, a mother of 3 boys I met, she told me that one day the settlers threw rotten food at them and called them dirty Arabs. And also she had to repair her windows 3 times because they were destroyed by settlers. And Mahmoud also told me that this family doesn't have access to their own roof anymore, because there was an incident where they had a Palestinian flag on their roof, and then a settler came to their roof and tried to take this flag down. And one of the family members pushed the settler away. Nobody got hurt, but the soldiers saw this as the right moment to deny them entry to their own roof. And I've seen many of these instances where either soldiers or settlers would take down Palestinian flags. And for me, it's very clear that this symbolic act of taking down a flag shows how little respect Israelis have for the sovereignty and self-determination of the Palestinian people, of whom they already took 78% of their land, made 750,000 Palestinians into refugees, and destroyed more than 400 villages, and now occupy the other 22% and deny Palestinians from having their own flag and own national symbols. One day we were having a political tour in the old city of Hebron by a human rights activist, Badia Douek, and there was a group of young settlers coming towards us. There were about 11 settlers, and I would think they were aged 15 to 17, 18. And they were walking on the street, and they were on one side shielded by an Israeli army vehicle. There were 2 soldiers walking with them on foot, and there was 1 soldier at the side of the road. And they came towards us, and their faces showed an arrogance that you wouldn't expect to have at such a young age. I mean, maybe never, but especially not at such a young age. And they yelled things at us in Hebrew that we didn't understand, and one of them made this symbol, which could either mean peace or victory, which is both kind of strange in this context. And then when they were past us, we saw a little bit further down the road that one of these young settlers spit at a Palestinian man who was sitting in front of his house. And when we walked down and we passed by this man who was spat on, we saw that he was trying to communicate with us, but he couldn't really talk. He mumbled words that we couldn't understand. And he was seemingly upset, but he was mute, so he couldn't tell us what had happened. And on this same tour, we were supposed to go to a swap of land, which lies in between the 2 settlements of Hebron, Kiryat Arba and Givat Havot. And there are a few Palestinians living on this land. However, we didn't go to this land because the day before, on the 17th of June, an elderly man was attacked by settlers, and that's why our tour guide thought it was maybe not safe for us to go there. And then I did want to see this person who was attacked, and my tour guide, he would go visit him the next week, so I joined him. Yes, and we found him, Abdul Karim al-Ja'bari, 64 years old. He's also called Abu Anen because he's the father of Anen. And so he lives, his family's land is between these 2 settlements, and there's even a tent on his land which serves as a synagogue. And this tent was declared illegal by Israel's Supreme Court in 2015. However, soldiers are still allowing settlers to use it. They're shielding them, and so on Saturdays there are like dozens of settlers who go there to pray, and on Jewish holidays these numbers would rise to hundreds. And so what happened was, first I wanted to say that the United Nations documented multiple settler attacks on this family, from shooting throwing stones, breaking into their homes, damaging their homes, stealing livestock, and stealing crops. And according to the family, all 7 sons and 3 daughters have been hospitalized due to settler attacks. And this man was the last one who was hospitalized. And it happened, the accident happened, yeah, I'm sorry for the graphic pictures. He was harvesting his olives on his land, and he was attacked from behind by a settler who was carrying an abandoned iron pipe, which at the outside of it was as sharp as a knife. And in total, Abu Anan was cut 3 times on his head. And at some point, he turned around and he wanted to defend himself, and the Israeli settler was about to throw a big rock at him, and so he defended with his arm, and he also broke his arm. And then at some point, the settler, together with all the other settlers who were watching the scene, not actively participating but watching, they all ran away, and Abu Anan ran towards the Israeli soldiers, because we are in, that part where only Israeli soldiers are, so he had to go to them for help. And they called the Israeli ambulance. However, at the moment when the Israeli ambulance arrived, so did a settler, which is very infamous among Palestinians. He is called Ofer Hana, and he's been, Palestinians say that he has committed a lot of crimes against Palestinians, but of course there's no official record because they don't get punished. And so he prevented anyone from providing first aid to Abu Anan. So even the Israeli ambulance personnel did nothing, even though they were present on the scene. And then Abu Anan's wife, who was of course terrified because he was bleeding from his head very seriously, called the Palestinian Red Crescent. And even this, you cannot, the Palestinian Red Crescent is very reliable, but they cannot count on being allowed to go in this part of Hebron, because sometimes they are held back by the Israeli soldiers, or it might take a very long time. In the past, for example, there were 2 Palestinian children who were inside a house that was on fire, and the Palestinian fire brigade wasn't allowed to go through, and that's why these children died. Fortunately, in this case, the ambulance arrived and took Abu Anan. And sorry. Oh, I thought I heard something. Okay. In the meantime, Abu Anan's own children were in his house, and they witnessed how the settlers had taken out a speaker in front of the police station, which is in the settlement, but very close. Yeah, you can see this is his house, and there are the fences of where the settlement begins. And they sang, Abu Anan is dead. But he wasn't dead. He needed 30 stitches in his head, but he wasn't dead. And by the time this news reached the settlers, they started attacking Abu Anan's house, his family's house, which they have done many times before, and they have a camera outside. So, I saw also the tape, and they threw stones at the walls, threw stones at the roof, tried to damage the cars. And at some point when Abu Anan came home, he was asked by the Israeli civil administration to file a complaint against the settlers. So he went to the police station, and the police had already assembled all the settlers who were likely involved into a room, because there are cameras everywhere, so they could have recognized these people. And Abu Anan pointed out exactly who did what. And among those who were present were, for example, 3 sons of Itamar ben Gvir, which is a lawyer and a member of the Knesset, the Israeli parliament. And after Abu Anan told the story, the police officer, according to Abu Anan, told him, I swear you are speaking the truth, and these settlers should be punished. The next day, after spending 1 night in jail, all settlers were released without charges. And the Israeli human rights organization Yesh Din reports that 90% of settler violence goes unpunished. So whether it's throwing stones at Palestinian shops or houses, spitting at a Palestinian man, nearly killing an elderly Palestinian man, or taking over a Palestinian-owned house, settlers are protected by soldiers and rarely punished for their crimes. And after hearing all these stories, of course, you wonder how Palestinians can stay sane in these circumstances. And I think especially this is hard for the youth, and the youth are the ones who sometimes let themselves be hurt. For example, on Fridays, and I will describe to you a scene. One day I was walking through the old city on a Friday, and this is the part of the city that's usually crowded. There's a souk, as the visitors of Hebron may know, but on Fridays it's totally empty, and it's not very smart maybe to walk there because it's empty and this is the day of confrontations. But I wanted to walk, and if I didn't walk, I would have to take the car, which would take me 25 minutes to cover a distance which is actually only 1 kilometer or less, but you have to go all the way around because Shohada Street is closed. So I walked through this completely empty streets apart from 3 little children that were playing, and at some point I looked up and I looked right into the faces, or even you don't really see faces, but I looked right at 2 soldiers who were standing on this Palestinian building, and they were pointing their guns in the street where I was walking. And I was afraid. I didn't know what was going on, and I felt very, I felt unshielded. I felt, vulnerable. Yes. And so I asked them, I don't know, a bit blunt. I asked them, can I go on? Can I walk here? And they say, you can go anywhere you want, which is for me true, of course. So then I went on and I found myself at a roundabout, which is the outskirts of the place where every Friday protests take place. So every Friday, a bigger or smaller group of mostly boys and men, Palestinian boys and men, would gather here and throw stones at the occupation soldiers. And every time I would see this scene, I was overcome by how bizarre it is, because you see 15-year-old boys with t-shirts throwing stones at soldiers who have every unthinkable and thinkable, other way around, thinkable and unthinkable weapon at their disposal. And it may seem like a joke sometimes because it's so unequal, but of course on this place a lot of boys and men found their death, so it's not a joke. And I know one Palestinian who became my friend told me that when he was 16-year-old, his 16-year-old friend bled to death here at this place, but he couldn't help him because they were still being held under fire. And Mahmoud, she told me that every Friday she locks she locks her whole house and she doesn't sleep to prevent her boys from participating in these protests, which is of course understandable. But I would also always understand these boys who would go to the street, because not a single person who is young and has dreams would go down without a fight. Palestinians are trapped, and all of my friends expressed this in different ways, but many of them talked about the ocean. 71% of the world is covered in ocean, and yet Palestinians don't have access to it. And in the past, it used to be different. You could pick up, as a Palestinian, you could pick up your family in Gaza and have cake in Jordan, have lunch in Syria, swim in Jaffa, pray in Jerusalem, and nobody would dare to forbid you entry into a world over which nobody has ownership. And now, Palestinians are faced with checkpoints in every direction they go, and if they want to get out of the West Bank or out of Gaza, they need a permit. And these permits, I'm not an expert, but what I do know is that there is no website where you can go to and check if you do tick all the boxes. It's very arbitrary who gets a permit, and even if you get a permit, it may be declined. And if your application is declined, you won't get an explanation. And also, Palestinians bump, when they want to go anywhere, they bump into this wall, 12-meter high wall made of concrete. And for those who have been in Berlin, I mean, we know that this wall bears a lot of resemblances to the wall we once had in Europe, which we now call the Wall of Shame, because it tore families apart and it impeded the movement of all citizens who lived around it. And I wonder, how long are we going to have double standards? The last scene I want to describe is when I was eating pizza on the sidewalk with one of my best Palestinian friends. This was in the new part of Hebron. It was a Thursday night. The atmosphere is, like a Thursday night, maybe in any other city, apart from the fact that these Palestinians, they cannot really go anywhere, so they're all sort of crowded into this main street. And we were eating pizza, and my friend, he showed me the map of Palestine that I think most of us know, on which you see that in 1946, historic Palestine mostly belonged to the Palestinians, but by now they barely have anything left. And my friend said, "You see this? Israel will not stop. In some years there will be no Palestine. We will not be here. Remember me. Remember I said this. You will see. We will be gone." And my greatest wish is to prove him wrong, because the increasing number of settlers that move to the West Bank, the unwielding protection they receive from the Israeli soldiers and the royal benefits they receive from the Israeli government suggest that settlers are not the outcasts at the extreme end of the Israeli spectrum, but rather, as I wrote in my article, at the celebrated forefront of Israel's colonial project. And it seems very clear that 78% of historic Palestine was not enough, and that they want to evict all Palestinians from their land and also occupy the other 22% and take it for their own. And silence is complicity, and we are very silent. Luckily not in this room, but you know, in general, very silent. And I think that if we remain silent, we will find ourselves on the wrong side of history. And I know that facing the situation in occupied Palestine also means facing ourselves. I come from the Netherlands, most here come from the United States. Our countries have a long history of colonialism, settler colonialism, neocolonialism, a present of neocolonialism. And of course, we will have to look ourselves in the eye, and we also see that our countries have a big part. We played a big part in the foundation of Israel, and we play a big part in Israel in its current form. It was a colonial project, Israel. It was a way to secure Western hegemony overseas, but it was also a way to make up for a past of relentless Jewish persecution. And I know that this history is incredibly painful, but the pain of the past cannot justify the pain of the Palestinian present. And we should also recognize that anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism should not be conflated, that Israeli policies are not based on any Jewish values, and I think everyone can attest to that. So we should be able to criticize Israel for its blatant disrespect of the human rights of those Palestinians living in the West Bank and in Gaza, as well as those living within Israel. We should be able to criticize Israel for demanding its right to self-determination while it's constantly undermining the right to self-determination of the Palestinian people. And we should be able to criticize our governments for pretending to value human rights but constantly support a state that's constantly undermining the human rights of the Palestinians. I'm not done. Almost. No. I wanted to quote Nelson Mandela, because in the year I was born, in 1997, he said, "We know too well that our freedom is incomplete without the freedom of the Palestinians." And I'm sad it has to be said again today, but it has to be said again today. No one is free until all are free, and freedom cannot be partial. Freedom cannot be at the cost of others' freedom. The earth is round. We cannot escape each other. We are bound to live together, and I think this can be a beautiful thing. So the one last thing, which is something that goes always through my mind when I'm thinking of this, is we can do so much better.
Way down here. Well, thank you. I want to express on behalf of Tree of Life our sincere gratitude to our speakers for joining us and sharing about their life experiences and giving us a more insight into what the occupation is like in Hebron and how unjust it is. And I think Mela expressed it very eloquently. We cannot be silent. I mean, tell your friends, but most importantly, tell our government. And we need action, and I personally don't see that progress being made unless the United States and other governments stop funding these injustices. And I want to just thank everyone for joining us tonight. Thank you.
These are the keys that we have to remember the Palestinian people. Once I had a home, I still have the key. I take it everywhere I go to prove to all the world it's so all the world can see. The walls were painted blue, front door carved by hand, and generations of my kin and strangers all were welcome in when they walked upon my land. Pray for us all. Name us the fallen. faces forgotten, once I had a home. Olive trees once grew where mounds of rubble stand. A man can feel himself a king when water flows from well and spring, and peaceful is the land. Pray for us all, and name us the fallen, faces forgotten, once I had a home. The stars shine down on bone and skin, on wire and walls that hold us in, on roads that can't lead home again. Pray for us all. Name us the fallen, faces forgotten. Pray for the fallen, all the world watching. Pray for us all the world watching. Eliza Gilkison is the author of that. Thank you for being with us tonight, these incredible witness, and we vow to right this wrong. We have a gallery of paintings. Among those, these three by Diane Esmond, who is a French painter, were confiscated by the Nazis and then repatriated by the family. And doesn't it strike you that the same thing is happening over again in Palestine? Thank you. It's just really an honor for us to have you here.